There we go. Coach is the the first thing we see for this week's podcast. Can Jett continue to defeat Tomac? I don't know. We will see. And also, is Deegan going to go undefeated at this point? Can anyone beat him? Well, I've got the mad scientist, Coach Rob, with me, and we are very tiny at the moment. How are you doing, Coach?
Hey, good morning. Good morning to everybody who's here with us live. Thank you so much. Thanks for carving some time out in your Monday morning for us to do some armchair quarterbacking on some great racing over the weekend for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Coach. I know we were talking about a little bit of nutrition wise with what I was doing this weekend. But first off, I think that's important with when it comes to nutrition with a lot of guys that are racing, weekend warrior type stuff, whether they're doing GNCCs, off-road races, some sort of hare scramble type deal or works race or whatever you call it. But to not jump too far ahead with Hangtown, what was your standout?
In regards to good, bad, we can do uppers and uppers or downers. What do you want to start with?
Well, what did you think of Jett rolling in for that third place in Moto 1?
I thought it was brilliant. I mean, he even declared what his strategy was. He's like, okay, look, it's hot. I'm not gaining anywhere, so he immediately went into conservation mode. And obviously, we're sitting here on a Monday morning, literally armchair quarterbacking it, but the strategy worked out perfect because nobody knew that they were going to shorten the second moto. So not only did he conserve a little bit in Moto 1, then a shortened moto in Moto 2, it worked perfect for Jett. It bit Tomac in the butt, unfortunately. So I personally, like I texted you, I have a really big problem with them shortening the race. Johnny, you've moved into the world of triathlon. You remember when Laidlow was winning Ironman Hawaii, he was 7.5, 8 minutes up on everybody and completely grenaded himself when he hit the Queen K Highway. You race the conditions and everybody's strategy needs to adjust accordingly. I hate to say it, but it's once again, instead of the athletes being required to step up to the demands of the racing, the race promoters, as woke as they are, moved it the other direction and said, oh, and like you said in your post race, is 5 minutes going to make that much of a difference? No, it's not in the big scheme of things.
Well, honestly, it is. That's for somebody's like mental, like, hey, I don't have to do 2 more laps, because at 2:30 a lap time.
Well, it's just, and that's what I texted you, doing a lot of work with the GNCC riders. I work with Steve and Denise Hatch with their riders. And it blows my mind. If it's super hot and you think those conditions are going to be difficult, Johnny, you've been out there as a triathlete, you know that you have to adjust your pace. And that's part of the strategy. The athletes have to step up and match the demands of the race and may the best man win. People made a big deal about Deegan having to go to medical. How many people after an endurance event go to medical? 50% of them. Now, I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. That's what this is supposed to be a difficult sport for a reason. And I've been very public about it. What I love about motocross racers and off-road riders and racers is every square centimeter of our body's covered. So the dissipation of heat is inhibited, which makes it even more difficult. That's why it's such a badass sport. Think about it, and all joking aside, imagine all the gear that we wear as riders. Imagine that on the Queen K Highway at Ironman Hawaii. Helmet, boots, gloves, jersey, pants, and trying to dissipate heat. That's what makes our sport so badass. But hey, if you see that it's going to be 100 plus degrees, you don't go out and race like it's 72 degrees with low humidity. It's no different than what we see in a marathon. It's no different than what you see in a criterium, Tour de France. It's you got to play the game. That's part of the strategy.
Coach, do you think it would have been beneficial for the riders to have some sort of a bladder, even if it only being like 6 to 12 ounces on their back or in their helmet, so that they can, over a 35-minute moto, that first moto? Because we saw guys like Hymas, they didn't race the second moto because they weren't able to. And when I was looking at it and looking at the weather with it being 103, I'm like, which guys are going to blow up? Probably all the privateers are going to blow up because they're not going to have like an ice bath or the IV to refuel you between an hour, where you're like, hey, this is just a one and done. type deal. And so I was expecting Tomac to really come out hard Moto 2, just because, his dad is a world-class champion mountain biker that's just like what we're talking about, used to having longer races and
Yeah,
known to train. And also, he's got I wouldn't say blood doping on his side, but a little bit of the natural blood doping from, living at 7,000 feet to then going to
sure.
Hangtown.
Yeah, I mean, his dad has always adhered to the train high, race low. It's nothing new in the endurance world. Answering your question, you actually pose a very, very good question. Is it legal for motocrossers to wear a 1 or a 2 or a 3-liter bladder? I mean,
Mm.
you see you see all these GNCC guys, they race with up to a 5-liter bladder. That's a lot of water. So like I've done some work with some race car racers, Townsend Bell and those types of guys. And we've looked at putting a bladder in the race car, but because of the lateral G's, 1 gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. So when you look at an 8-pound addition to a car that's moving laterally, you got to look at the G forces. Now, I don't know in the motocross world, and you're very good on finding things in the rule book. I don't know if it says specifically you're not allowed to do it, but then you bring up a good point. Wonder why somebody else didn't think about it. You saw Jett with the cooling vest. You saw Tomac with the cooling vest. You saw JT Money do a great segment where they were showing the ice baths at the Honda. I mean, the list goes on, but I don't even know if they're allowed to use the bladder.
Okay, well, I'll look. I'll try to see if I can find it on the rule book, because that would be something, because that would add in performance. Because, with working with you for so long, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but every 20 minutes or within every hour, you need to consume something like 100 carbs, something like
Uh,
that.
you could look at it as grams of carbs or total calories. The sweet spot's around 300, 320 calories per hour is usually the threshold that the body can actually absorb. There's an inverse relationship between heart rate and your ability to digest any type of calories. So you get into food complexity. This is where the energy fuel comes in because it's liquid. It doesn't have to be broken down. It can be immediately absorbed. If you bring the heart rate up, you have to bring the molecule of the sugar down. That's why our energy fuel has 3 formulations. The magic number is when your heart rate is elevated, you cannot take in more than 300 calories per hour. Now, what's different is with the pro motocross guys, 30 plus 2, their constant movement is for, let's say, 40 minutes for even numbers. If you're doing a triathlon, if you're doing Ironman, top guys, we're at around 7.5 hours, right? That's constant movement of 300 calories per hour. For our listeners, what's difficult is you race a 7 or an 8-minute race, then you might sit around for 15 minutes, then you have an 8-minute race, then you might sit around for 2 hours, then you have an 8-minute race. You don't have that constant burn rate. So this is what
Mhm.
makes race day nutrition so difficult. But the sweet spot is no more than 300 calories per hour when your heart rate's elevated. That's the rule of thumb. Now, when you talk about grams of carbs, there's 4 calories to 1 gram of carbohydrate. So you could do the math backwards if you're doing it by grams or if you're doing it by total calories. We do it by
Okay.
total
Well,
calories
I'm
for.
just assuming. I
Mhm.
wish there was more data with these guys, because they all use kind of Lit Pros and they all use Garmin, so you know what their heart rate is.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm, but we don't. The viewer does not know what their heart rate is. I would love for them to show more of like what they're doing. Even like, hey, this bike is in 5th gear,
Yeah.
and he's doing this much RPM, because that would be so cool. They do it in MotoGP, but that would be so cool to see it Jett versus Tomac. Jett's at 4,500 RPM while Tomac is at 12.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Jett's in 5th gear while Tomac is just screaming it in 3rd.
Yeah.
But then you could see, hey, Jett's heart rate is 165 and Tomac is 185, and they're doing the same lap times.
I love hearing you say this because if you go to the Tour de France, Lance Armstrong was known for spinning at above 100 RPMs. Jan Ullrich was known for spinning in around a 70 to 75. Both have won the Tour de France. So to your point, you can't say either one is wrong. It just shows
Mhm.
you quick twitch versus slow twitch. You have Jett that's, like you said in your post race show, lugging the motor a little bit lower, a little bit smoother, not compressing the suspension, conserving energy everywhere. Where Tomac, like you said, is just and bouncing off of everything. But both have won championships, so you can't say one's better than the other. That's where I kind of laugh at some of the riding coaches out there. When Sexton and Jett don't sit down in a corner. Every riding coach in the world now is like, don't sit down in the corners. You don't sit down in the corners. Look at the two top guys. You don't sit in the corners. And then you go out and you get Deegan and Tomac that sit down 5 minutes early. And then that's the new flavor of the month. And it's just, it drives me nuts. It's
I will push back a little bit. I do think that Tomac's riding style is
yeah.
a little bit of a dying breed. I do think it's working now,
And then
but
you
I
have Deegan,
don't
and then
think
you have Deegan that's bringing it right back.
you do. But then the inverse of that is you have Cole Davies, who's riding more like Jett.
Yep.
And I know the people that we talk, people don't like my view that I think Cole is more talented than Deegan. And they even said it on the broadcast, which I was happy that they did. That they said, "Hey, Deegan, normally even last weekend at Paula didn't have like some of the fastest lap times, but he was able to still come through all the guys.
Yeah.
Why is that, right?" And
Yeah.
so that's what he said multiple times before: is you got to be a dog in motocross, and you got to have the mental there. So when I make comments of saying that the fastest guy doesn't always win, it's
Yeah.
not a diss on somebody. It's
Nope.
actually a compliment to the SOB that wins the race that wasn't the fastest guy, because he had to go through some trials and tribulations to get to number one. And I think that's
Yeah.
what Deegan does.
Well, and add another dynamic to what you just mentioned there. Normally, we would say somebody who rides very aggressive, Tomac style, Deegan style, they tend to get hurt more often. I don't think anybody that's listening and is with us here live, I don't think anybody would disagree with this comment. Tomac blowing his Achilles out wasn't because he was riding aggressive, right? That was just in the G out, was just a weird freak accident. Outside of
But
Tomac,
his equipment, right? He did not have the
the
support on the
brace.
boots there.
Yeah.
I will argue that
Yeah. But it's
it
not
was
an
already
aggressive
compromised.
riding, because normally if you and I were sitting here having a cup of coffee, I would say, look, the person that's riding the ragged edge is just 1 millimeter away from yard darting himself and getting hurt quite often. But yet Tomac has had a very illustrious career, with the exception of when he was with Geico and he blew both of his shoulders out in that right hander. That was gross, right? But usually you would say the person that's really aggressive, and then the person that's usually smooth has the least amount of injuries. And you can't even throw that into the equation anymore, because Hayden is breaking all the rules. I mean, it's just amazing when you think. And I wanted to know your opinion, and I'd like to know what people say in the chat room here. When was it 3 years ago that Deegan was racing futures and got like thirds and fourths? It wasn't that long. I don't think it was more than 3 years ago, was it?
No, no, no,
He
no.
started that season in futures, then he got the factory race bike, and
Yeah,
then
it was
he's
just
just
because
he's killing it.
2023,
Yeah.
basically, right? And then
Now
that
think about
year, he ended up winning moto, winning like
mhm.
a supercross, and then becoming SMX champ. And then this year was the first year that he won the supercross
It's just
deal.
he breaks all the rules. And you know, Jett's done the same thing. Look at what he's accomplished in such a short period of time. And then you bring up Cole Davies. I think those three are the freight train of the future, because you've got, I mean, it's so crazy to think that Jett's going to be considered the old guy when Deegan and Cole's come up. Cole Davies comes
He's
up.
going to be 24,
Yeah,
25.
exactly. We're about to see the next decade. And I miss the Bob Hannas, the Kent Howertons, the Chuck Sons. I miss the RJs. I miss all of that, hardcore when they used to run 45-minute motos and all. I miss all that. But when you stop and you think about what we're about to see with Jett, I don't personally think we'll see Deegan stay on 250s. I think he's leaving way too much money on the line, and I don't think Brian's going to allow that, especially if he goes undefeated this season. What else does he have to prove? He's the fastest 250 rider. Brian's going to look at this from a business standpoint and go, it's a waste of my money to just stay down here to get another title. I can win 2 or 3 races in 450 and make more money than winning the championship as
You
a
make a good
250.
point, Coach, because of the fact that those guys are, they come from a world of trendsetters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where things are hot for just a few moments, almost like his T-shirt with him getting arrested. You
Yeah.
think Lando Norris would have wore that T-shirt if it was released now, rather
Yeah.
than when it was hot
Mm-hmm.
to be behind Deegan? And that's the same thing, is if let's just say worse comes to worse, which
Yeah.
hypothetically, it's probably never going to happen, but let's say Deegan gets hurt, right? And he's out. And so now he's going to stay in the 250 class. Well, and he comes back and he starts kind of doing the Austin Faulkner thing where he's not really excelling to his potential. Then his stock price goes down. Then all these other teams, Ducati and them, might be like, maybe that lucrative $5-10 million contract, because I really think that's what he's going to pull, is going to be, we'll do it $1 million, right? But a year ago, it was much hotter.
Yeah. Well, you bring up, again, you're unpacking something that's got a lot of weight on it. Jett's contract's about to be released on his re-signing, and it's ridiculous. I mean, when you had made the comment that Tomac's asking for $9 million, I've heard that's over a 3-year deal. And so you start to get into the same ballpark of what Jett's making. So when you start looking at where these price points are going for salaries for the top guys, right? You've got Jett. I heard his contract is quite extensive, like a lot of years, like close to 5. You start adding that up at 2.5-3 million base salary. You start adding up the gear deal. You start adding up bonuses. Do you think Deegan's going to stay down there in the 250? For those of us who have to work for a living, I know it's hard for us to imagine even getting paid to ride a dirt bike. Johnny, you tasted it. You were right there on the cusp of it. I can't even begin to relate to that. But when you're looking at the progress that Deegan has made in the last 2 years, the amount of championships he's racked up in 2 years, and then you think that, again, I have not spoken to Brian Deegan. I've never met the man. I just look at the way that they've done things. And Brian's like, okay, even if you go back to Jace's Gypsy Tales podcast, he's like, well, I think we've done the right thing, but we won't know until we dive in and find out. Well, now, if you look at these first 2 races outdoors, I think it goes without saying it's really a race for second place. He cleans up outdoors. He's got the Supercross title. Why would they want to stay for 250 for another season? There's not enough money in it for him. They're leaving way too much money on the table. And I think that's part of the moving behind the scenes as to why Tomac can't get an offer.
Camp is not after records, right? You don't think those guys are like, hey, we want to be the all-time winningest 250 rider before we move up to 450s? Or do you think they're chasing records? Or they're like, that game doesn't start until you hit 450s?
It's all about 450s, because we're not talking about how many championships Chase Sexton has on 250s. We're not talking about how long or how many championships RJ Hampshire has in 250s.
Well, Savachi, Stewart,
Like, we're not talking about any of those.
AP, like everybody, McElrath,
Well, we talked about it at the beginning of the season. We talked about how many guys in the 450 class have a 250 championship, one and done. We didn't talk about multiples. What we talked about is the idea of, hey, move to the 450 class, and then you've got the Jeremy McGraths, the Ricky Carmichaels, the Chad Reed results, James Stewart, as you mentioned, now Jett. And you don't think that Deegan wants to steal some of that thunder from Jett? That whole family would love to steal that thunder. That'll be one of the biggest family rivalries we've ever seen. And to that point that was mentioned with Joe Shimoda, he's fighting for a ride to go back to Cowie. He's already made some executive decisions with his agent. He's going back to Cowie. You don't think that looks good for him? The only one that can even stay in contact with Deegan? It's huge.
And I saw this in Denver, when I was talking with Deegan. It was blatantly obvious that the shorter rider, I think he's like 5'8", 5'7", was big. I'm not the biggest guy, but, I'm taller than Deegan. And when I was standing next to him, I was like, hey, you look like you're about 20 pounds heavier than I am. What are you pulling? And he's like, oh, dude, I've been hitting the gym a lot. I'm 165, 170. And I'm like, that's 450 weight right there. Right. And so to me, I'm thinking, okay, this is all moving. These guys have a plan. They don't do anything by just shits and giggles and see what is happening. Like, there's a reason behind every calculation that family does. That's why everyone is following them. And I will say this, right? And people in the comments, shoot me the shit here. Okay. I think, right, this is my view, that the harder competition for Deegan is not Jett or Tomac. It is Cole Davies. And if you let Cole Davies mature and you race the 250 class again, and start consistently getting beat by him, that's going to look worse than you getting beat by Jett or Tomac, in my opinion. So I think it's better for him to go 450 and race against those guys and beat them, or maybe, get close to them. I think that's going to look better on paper and to the general population than if you have a younger that starts maturing and ends up potentially, beating on a 250. Because again, his weight is going to the leaning towards the 450, where I think he will ride a 450 better than the 250.
Yeah, I totally agree. You're seeing RJ Hampshire do the same thing. The Deegans live by design, not by default. And when you look at the idea, when he was on an 85, Brian already had him ready. He was training for a 250. And when they would go to the 250, it wasn't just to go and be competitive, it was to be the best. And like you said, that you've got some people that are career 250 riders. What are they told? Marchbanks, you're too heavy for a 250. You've got to lighten up. You got to lighten up. What's Deegan telling you? I'm in the gym trying to throw on pounds of muscle, because that tells you they know where they're going. It's just a matter of when. And then you start to put all that together. Look at how much better RJ is riding the 450 than the 250. I don't know the story. I know that I don't know what's going on with RJ over the last couple of years, but I know, like, when Tomac won for Geico, he only trained on a 450 during the week, and then he won the championship on the 250. That's called the overload principle. Get used to throwing the 450 around. Not every athlete can make that transition. It's like some people can ride a 125 two-stroke and then jump on a four-stroke and be just as fast, and then go back to a two-stroke and still be fast. Not everybody can do that. Tomac made it very now, what's interesting, again, we're talking about riders who have parents who are previous champions. It wasn't an accident that John Tomac wanted Eli training on a 450. It's not by accident that Brian is having Hayden do certain things knowing that they're going to a 450. And there's nobody, once the history books are done with Deegan, nobody's going to be talking about what he did in 450. They will talk about how much progress he made in 2 full seasons. He got 4 or 5 championships. It'll be now something else that you just mentioned, Johnny, that I think needs to be brought up in more detail. Think about the musical chairs. If Deegan doesn't get that 450 deal, and we're seeing it right now with Tomac kind of on the outside looking in because the music's about to stop and he may not have an opportunity at Yamaha, right? We're hearing now that they might find some money and he might be able to stay there.
Dude, they have to. Like,
Yeah.
that is the dude, literally, like what my thumbnail is. The entire 450 championship, for viewers and everything, is not a battle for third place. It's whether or not Tomac can beat Jett. That is the story. That's what it's going to be all year long.
Yeah.
And you can't believe that this kid, not kid, but he's about as old as I am, would not have a ride. And sorry, backpedaling just a little bit. Like, when we saw Deegan take out Cole Davies, it wasn't really a takeout. It was more of a just take the line away. And it was a dude that's 175, 180 pounds in gear, hitting a kid that's 140 in gear. So you exploded one kid at speed. It wasn't a takeout deal.
But I want to go back to what you were saying. I don't think Deegan is afraid to race Cole. I think that right now, Cole's proven that they're comparable. And Cole's flat out beat Deegan in some motos. You can't deny it. It's now history, right? We watched some Supercross races where Cole was able to go around. Now, Cole unfortunately grenaded himself a couple times, and then in that one race, Deegan moved him out of the way. Like Phil Nicoletti said, you'd move your grandma out of the way for 600K too. You know what I mean? It's just, leave it to Phil Nicoletti to come up with one of these one-liners. He's one of the best. But you look at the musical chairs. If you look at Cole Davies and you look at his ascent, and then to your point, these two start duking it out instead of Deegan going, and we're going to be having a lot more meat to talk about when Hayden goes up and is competing against Sexton, Tomac, Hunter, Jett, right? The idea that if he stays down in the 250 class, we could be talking about him banging bars with Cole Davies again, or, some of these other top 250 guys. Joe Shimoda, he's obviously doesn't have a 450 offer. This is what I'm saying. The musical chairs are very interesting for the next 2 years, because already we know Ken Roxon's re-signed with Suzuki, so he's going to stay there for another year. We don't know what's going on with Ducati. We don't know what's going on with Triumph. I don't believe Gas is coming back. you start working on some of these transitions. What if Deegan doesn't go? There may not be an opportunity for him. Right now is the best opportunity for him to go to 450, and it creates an insulation blanket where, again, you have a RJ Hampshire or you have a Joe Shimoda, or the best example, Johnny, is Levi Kitchen. When I heard that Levi signed a 2-year extension with Pro Circuit, it absolutely solidified the fact that Sexton's with Kawasaki, because that was the big moving pin. If Sexton didn't go to Kawasaki, Levi was supposed to get that. And then all of a sudden you threw Tomac into the conversation, but we know he's not going back to Kawasaki. So that's why this has been an interesting dynamic. We're sitting here talking about, and I agree with you, Cole Davies is extremely, extremely talented. We've seen Cole Davies just straight up beat Deegan. Now, be able to do that for 11, 12, 15, 22 rounds, that's a different story. And then to be able to do it with that type of depth of talent, I see Deegan wanting to go against the best of the best. It's just like they said on the broadcast. Think about how cool it is that Jett is racing against Tomac. Jett never anticipated that. And that's because think about all the legends that Tomac's raced against. Think about it. If you look at the starting list of all the people that Tomac's raced against, the list is
it's
astounding.
wild that he's been able to have the career that he has, because
Yeah.
this whole conversation started about different riding styles,
Yep.
and a lot of people in the chat were talking about Everts and Christoph Purcell, and
Yeah.
I do think those guys are from over Europe. They had a different kind of slow start, get faster type in the motos, and then Carmichael sort of changed everything with like, just we're going to start off with max speed, 150% first corner, just go with it. And then if I'm giving more context, Dungy I feel like had that sort of Kevin Windham style, but was a little bit faster. But then he still retired early because he broke his neck and was like, oh man, this could get interesting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But now full circle, you got Tomac that has this out of control, but in control. I would say that he rides the bike just as hard as Carmichael did, but
Mm-hmm.
he's so much stronger than Carmichael just because of, I would probably say, the density, because he's a bigger dude. He's like 5'10" rather than Carmichael being a complete little jockey. That has helped him have such a long career to where he's able to race these kids that are young. But back to the 250s a little bit, Coach. I think that the camp is talking about like, hey, I can't imagine that the Deegans haven't been like, okay, what's better for us long term? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's that saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Yeah.
And they know what money is on the line here. And it looks better, just as some of the comments pointed out, to lose from a champion like Jett than it is to lose from a rookie like Cole. Right. And I'm not saying that would happen. Okay.
Right.
There's a good probability that Deegan would still wax the 250 class, but I'm saying risk versus reward on paper. What looks worse if you're going to lose, right? As far as
Yeah.
planning up setting goes, when you're only talking about money, right? And how much more you could get by being the top dog. So that's where I would think Deegan is going. And then I want your opinion. We'll talk a little bit more about Hangtown here, but this whole deal with Chase, we talked about it. I know we had a small conversation with him with his taking his goggles off, and you were pretty certain that he had a concussion. Is he using the concussion as a get out of jail free card so he doesn't have to race for KTM anymore, so that he can start training and getting ready for potentially SMX? I don't know if they're allowed to switch brands in their contracts till then, or just start getting ready completely for 2026.
Yeah, I remember I heard you say that in your recap show as well. Here's the question I was going to text you about. When are the contracts normally up? October 1st, right? Historically, isn't that when the contracts are up?
When they start releasing stuff, but nobody really, I wish we were more transparent about stuff like that. But so like,
what I don't have committed to memory is, when does the SMX series end? Because if the SMX series goes beyond the contract, then yes, he could train. But see, this is where it gets very, very technical, right? Let's say that he uses the get out of jail card. He pulls the injury clause. We've seen a lot of riders do it. Malcolm Stewart's done it a lot. We've seen Webb use it a lot, right? You know that you're not going to be staying with the team. So you use that as an opportunity to go get healthy. When he did not finish, when he didn't start this weekend, the championship's over, right? The mathematics, it's done.
Honestly, the championship was over that first race.
First race, exactly. But it just put the nail in the coffin that, to your point exactly, if the championship was even remotely in his cards, he would have tried to come back. I mean, we've seen Joe Shimoda ride with completely annihilated knuckles just to ride to try to, earn his job, earn some revenue, et cetera, et cetera. So when you zoom out to 10,000 feet, it by
And he
contract,
probably would have if he was riding for a job. But the rumor
well,
is he has a job with
yeah,
Cali
he's
for
got a
like 2
job.
years.
Yeah, he's
That's the
got a
difference
job.
between the 450 guys and the 250 guys. Reason why I think
Exactly.
McAdoo and them crash themselves and continue to ride is because they don't have a job.
Well, back to train up just a little bit. They don't have an injury clause in their contract. So therefore, you don't race, you don't get paid. I was working with some riders, doesn't matter who their names are, but their contract stated that if they didn't complete 50% of the main events, then they would forfeit 50% of their annual salary. So that's why you see guys that'll just tape it up and go race, and they don't care if they're rolling around because it's based on what's said in the contract. And that's why I want to back the train up to your question, because there's so much meat on the bone. If you back up the dates, right, of when the contract
Coach, you guys
ends.
are saying November 1st.
Okay, so
But
that
hypothetically, we'll go with it. Thanks,
well,
guys.
and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's why I love this chat room. Everybody's very educated. The idea here is if the contract ended, like you say, for conversation's sake, if the contract ends in September and the SMX finale is in October or November, then he can show up on a new bike. Because it's not going to, do you think do you think the promoters give a flying flip what color bike Sexton's on? No, they just want him in the race. But here's where it gets a little bit technical. Sexton cannot, by contract, cannot ride another colored bike while he's under contract. We all know they do, right? We all know when you go and you sign with another team, of course they've gone and ridden the bike and everybody knows it. But if they wanted to hold their feet to the fire, they could take them to court over it. Here we are sitting here in the beginning of June. Sexton's not going to be able to ride a Kawasaki publicly. He's not going to be able to hide it for 6 months, whatever, 4 or 5 months. So he's not going to show up at SMX on a Kawasaki. He's not going to have a chance to shake the platform down. Now, based on what they were saying here with contracts going into November, it negates the whole idea because contractually he can't ride another color until November 1st and the series is over. So no, I don't. If he does come back, which I don't think he will, he's got more to gain by just getting healthy and start training on a Kawasaki and, get his health back. Johnny, you mentioned, and I said this before, and I got some hate DMs, and I don't know why they're so full of, why is everyone so visceral? I'm just sharing my opinion. You may not agree with me, but let's just leave it at that. Did you notice, I mentioned it last week when Sexton came off the track and Jade asked him that question and he pointed to his head and he went like that. Have you noticed that every single replay does not have him pointing to his head and shaking no? They showed it on the race weekend. They showed him talking to Jade, but it was almost like when you see the media that edits the video to get the narrative to be what it wants. They did not show when he came off. He immediately rolled up and you see Jade ask a question and he shakes his head and points. It's interesting how nobody is replaying that. Nobody's replaying it.
Well,
So
the
big
problem is
concussion.
we don't have like a good reason for him. He has a post. I guess I could bring up the post, but the post literally just says, "Hey guys, sorry I've been dark. I'm not good, but nothing's broken."
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, what the fuck does that mean? That could be you need eye surgery, or you got a gnarly concussion, or you got a separated shoulder. I mean, none of us, because you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, logically, I'm just thinking, okay, this is just what we're talking about as far as pulling the contract clause. And Coach, I don't know if you saw the defending MotoGP champion Jorge Martin, where
just what you posted is all I've seen.
Yeah, is he's in his contract. Literally, he had like, hey, if I'm not performing well, I can drop you and go with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think more guys are going to start doing stuff like that? And if so, do you think it would be the likes of somebody like Jett, who's always on the up and up as far as the new innovation when it comes to, I, I don't know, manipulating for the betterment of yourself?
This is where the power of an agent comes in. Because if you look at stuff like Lucas Myrtle did, the things that he was able to bring into a contract, like the Lawrence experience, or was it called the Lawrence zone? Or I apologize, I don't know what it's specifically called, but I
Mhm.
mean, let's face it, our sport has seen nothing like that ever before. And whether you agree with Myrtle, that I don't want anybody to jump into the chat room and start getting into a banter about Myrtle. What I want people to stop and think about is your question is very on point. Here we are seeing it in another sport where the agent put it into the contract. I mean, it had to be signed by legal, right? So they put it in print. What are contracts designed for? Because things don't end when everybody's on good terms. Contracts are utilized when things end badly. So when you start looking at that, if you're afraid to put it in the contract, see, this is where I love talking to agents, the Jimmy Buttons of the world and the Lucas Myrtles of the world. Like I'll show you how naive I was to something. I just assumed, and as everybody knows, no one should make an assumption, right? I assumed that if you won the championship, they just gave you the bike. Mm-mm. If it's not in your contract, you don't get that championship bike. Now, to me, I was like, wow, because what people don't realize, it's a business, right? That bike's worth money. They'd rather have it they'd rather have it at the corporate headquarters. For that rider to get that, when I started working with Dunge and you walk in that living room and there's that number one Suzuki and that number one KTM in the living room, that's powerful as heck, you know? My point being is you're asking about a clause that allows somebody to get out if things aren't going the way they want. You see it in another sport. That's because an agent was able to get it pushed through. And then this is what's so powerful. Okay, Johnny, you want Sexton so bad, then you need to agree that that clause is in his contract. And if you want him bad enough, then you'll accept the clause and you got to be comfortable enough that you can make him happy. Otherwise, you wouldn't sign the contract. And that's where
Yeah,
this gets
it's
very,
just
very volatile.
it's just simple business, you know? It's
Yes.
the same thing like real estate, right? You know,
Yep.
we're both fighting on a house. I'm willing to go no appraisal, no inspection, and so it's just less risk on you. So it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, I'm gonna go with this SOB rather than, somebody else." So,
Yeah. Well, and
Kawasaki.
this is what's so powerful about, like, when you look at Webb last year getting out of his KTM contract. When was the last time you saw somebody tap out of a contract mid-season? I've never seen one.
Well, they kinda screwed him over too there.
Yeah, they
They
did.
were
Yeah,
trying
they
to
did.
make him run his name through the mud a little bit for that, which
Absolutely.
I thought was poor handling.
I totally agree with you 100%, but it still boils down to, no matter what your and I's opinion are on the way things were handled, when it comes down to the brass tacks of a contract and what the contract reads, think about it. When was the last time you saw one of the top guys be able to bounce out of a contract like that mid-season? We've heard a lot of scuttlebutt that the KTM deal that Sexton is currently under, we heard that contract had been signed. I've heard several numbers upwards of a year in advance. I heard that it was signed as early as Daytona, the year in advance. Now, one of the things that's been publicly spoken, and I totally agree with, is one thing that you can't, uh, where you have to give credit to Sexton is, even though he has signed with another team, left Honda, go to KTM, he still raced his tail end off for Honda. And we know he's going to Kawasaki, and he was given his best effort, right? He wasn't like he was out there. Now, some people got online and said, well, it just shows that Sexton's moving on, because in the first qualifier at Paula, he was 10th or 11th or something. I thought that was a little bit premature. We're going racing outdoors. We both know the first couple of rounds is about shaking down the bike as much as anything else. But
For some
um,
people, I don't think
yeah,
it's a coincidence that Jett and Tomac are doing so well, because
yeah,
those are the two guys that you guarantee have been healthy for a month and a half, that have been testing hardcore
yeah,
moto stuff. Where you have Webb and Sexton, they were on their supercross bikes during the week up until the last race, because there was a championship for millions of dollars on the line. So it's a little
yeah,
bit different. And again, this is why I really would love to see, in a perfect Johnny Hopper Supercross Motocross SMX World Series, is 3 Supercrosses, 2 motocrosses, 3 Supercrosses, 2 motocrosses, Supercross, motocross. Like, let's mix it up so that it keeps people on their toes, and it keeps people's confidence shook, because you get one dude that wins a race. Like, look at Seth, right?
Hmm.
We did not think he was a winning rider because he hasn't really shown. We knew he had the speed, but the finishing, he wasn't. As soon as he
Yeah.
did that, boom, he was up front the rest of the time. But if you
Hmm.
shake somebody's confidence by then going to a motocross and all of a sudden you finish 9th or 12th, then you're back to Supercross. We're like, well, I won, but now I kind of think, was it a fluke? Was it not? I think it's just better for the overall experience of the fans to be seeing different names up there all the time.
You know, the only people that I think would push back on, I think the riders would embrace it. I think they're up for the challenge. And as Hayden said, it's the same for everybody. I think the people that have the hardest is the mechanics and the chassis and all that, because, suspension to motocross, or excuse me, motocross to supercross, supercross to motocross, trying to get those bikes set up and balanced for those guys. It's already difficult enough as it is when you're just running, 17 straight supercrosses and 17 straight outdoors or whatever the numbers are. I'm just pulling random numbers. But those are the guys that I feel bad for because they're constantly chasing their tail. You brought up Seth, and I thought it was interesting. Do you see they're out there interviewing Shimoda, and it's like, we don't even talk about Seth? What a difference 2 weeks makes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Again, it goes back to what we were talking about with Deegan,
Yeah.
where when your stock is hot,
Yep.
make sure you capitalize on it. And
Exactly.
will
Well, think about
Deegan.
this. I'm sorry, finish your thought.
No, no,
I've
no,
got
no,
something I
no,
want
no,
to
no.
ask you about.
I talk too much, Coach.
No, go for it. You said something about Deegan. Finish
Nope,
your thought.
I'm not talking. I'm gonna sit here, play with some sticky notes, and you finish what you're saying.
The thing that blew my mind, and if you look at Tomac, or excuse me, um, look at the guys that did not start the second moto. Hymas, championship's over. Hammaker, championship's over. Now, Hammaker unfortunately got taken out, and then went down on his own. His championship's hopes are over. Hymas not starting the second moto, championship's over. You start going through all of this, right? We know Sexton, championship's over. Not starting that second moto. Look at the attrition rate from this weekend and how much it's dynamically changed the outcome of our season. So, and I loved at the very end when James was talking about the way the points were, that if you look at the top, I think they always put the top 10 that's on the board, with the exception of Tomac, everybody's a full moto already down or more. And we're only getting into round number 3. So when you start looking at this disparities so quickly, this is where I think it's interesting when you have somebody like in Supercross that gets hurt and they go, all right, well, the championship is over, so I'm going to start focusing on outdoors. How soon are we going to start to see people that the attrition rate outdoors is so enormous that people are just, I guess, just showing up. They're not really out there racing because they're already working on Supercross because we're halfway through the season. We're already 150 points back. What's the point? And with the exception of the factory guys, yes, he started in California and you've got a good concentration of numbers there. Did you see the actual registration list? How many total riders were there? Oh, there she is. She is ready to tear
She's
some
just
things up.
screaming. I might have to get her, just bring her down.
So how many 450 guys tried to qualify this weekend? Was it close to 100? I think I saw.
Honestly, I didn't look at the qualifying list. I just looked at the top
Well,
triple time.
it's just interesting when you look at, if you take the factory guys out, how the list is going to start to diminish. And obviously that's one of the benefits of going to different parts of the country, because you'll have guys up in the Southwick area that aren't going to be out in California and vice versa. But that's the only concern that I have is we're at round number 2 and only Tomac is the only guy that has a mathematical chance. Now, granted, all it takes is one mechanical, not that we've seen it with the Honda boys, but all it takes is one mechanical. Jett gets a DNF and we're back to a balanced game. And Lord knows we've seen it in Supercross. We can certainly see it again in motocross as well. But I was, just sitting here looking at the screen on Saturday and I'm like, look at Pro Circuit. Seth officially out. McAdoo, he's not even racing. So 2 of their 6 riders are already out. Ty Masterpool, you never know what you're going to get with him. If you saw the results, I think it was like 7 and 17 or something. Johnny, I do have a question for you on Masterpool, and I don't know if you have the information or not. No disrespect to Ty. I don't know the magnitude of his finger injury, but all we heard was that he didn't race Supercross because he had a pinky injury. And then you've got Joe Shimoda out there that lost half of his freaking knuckles and racing every weekend. How was Ty not? Now, I think it might cost Ty his contract this year, but Have you heard anything, or somebody in the chat room can help me out? What was the magnitude of Ty's finger injury that he couldn't race Supercross?
I don't know, coach. That's everyone reserves the right to try to do what's they think is best, and somewhere his family, because they've had a lot of opportunities, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
they've been on Star Yamaha and then they've been taken off and then they've kind of come from the bottom to come back up.
Yeah.
So I would think that it was serious enough to the point where they felt like, hey, their fighting chance to keep a job is by waiting to outdoors, rather than for kind of the same reason why I was talking about Deegan staying in the 250 class. It's going to look worse if Ty is running around outside the top 10 in Supercross just for a paycheck, or is he trying to think long term? I think he's trying to think a little bit more long term.
Yeah, but if you look at it, okay, that makes sense on paper. And now we're 2 rounds in and we haven't talked about Ty Masterpool at all. You got 1 top 10 finish out of 4 motos. We know that Shimoda is going to get signed. I hope it's a 2-year deal, but I think it's a 1. We heard that Levi Kitchen got a 2-year extension. And correct me if I'm wrong, again, chat room, you guys chime in here, keep me straight. I do believe that Seth has been re-signed. So now you've got 3 riders, right? You've got Shimoda, you've got Levi Kitchen, and you have Seth Hammaker. I even think, again, chat room, chime in and help me out here. Did McAdoo get an extension of his contract as well? Because you start looking at the idea that PC started the year with 6 riders, and I haven't heard anything about Marchbanks. He's looking really good. I still think he'd be better on a 450, but again, where's he get? What 450 ride could he get? I would have loved to have seen him ride the 450 that Cody Shock is riding, or I think is Shock riding 450 outdoors. I can't remember. But I don't think Club is interested in putting him on a 450. So it's just that PC team is in a very interesting situation. But after this weekend, I was surprised how many people took themselves out of contention. Hymus, done, And
Well, in the 250 class, it seems as if the race is going to be Joe versus Deegan. And as of right now, it looks like Deegan has pretty much everybody's number. And what I think is so crazy is Deegan is not astronomically faster. Like when I look at the qualifying times, usually Jett is a half a second to a second faster. I mean, Hangtown was an exception. Very hot, very dry. Conditions meant everything. Where again, you were talking about being able to adapt. He was within a tenth of the other riders. Okay. But Deegan is usually not that much faster than everybody. But then when he's in the motos, people end up just kind of getting out of his way. And so far, the only guy that really hasn't gone out of his way as far as a factory rider, not a 250 privateer with Kolbush, that was pretty cool. That was showing that like whatever motor package that they have was able to get a start and get a start from 22nd gate pick. He had a shitty ass gate pick. He was able to do that. That was epic to see. But my point, because I'm digressing, is Joe has really been the only guy that's been willing to not give up the line. Everyone else seems like they get out of Deegan's way.
See, that's where I have to politely disagree with you. I think Deegan has done just an incredible job of coming through 4th, 5th start. He's for every moto parent that's out there, please watch Deegan. He does not follow for any reason whatsoever. He's very creative. He reminds me of Tomac.
Were amazing at
insane. Yeah.
With the pressure, it just seems as if these guys end up giving the lines to Deegan. Like when it comes to where if he's barely on the inside of you, and in one of my my breakdowns, I'm going to show it here today or tomorrow when I finish the video, where you could literally, I believe Tom Vial had the wheel on Deegan, and Deegan was on the inside of him, but he braked early and just gave it to Deegan because he didn't want to get T-bone coming in the corner. At least that's what he thought. That's the only reasoning that is going on with a rider, is you're thinking the guy on the inside is going to just punt you off the track.
But that's what's so cool about racing is we race based on history. If you were a Matasevich, you knew Bradshaw was going to kill you. If you were Bradshaw, you knew Matasevich was going to launch his bike onto you. That was just a given, right? But you never expected that out of Jeff Stanton. You never expected that out of Bailey. You never expected that out of the, and that's what, to your point exactly, Deegan has played the ultimate trump card because he's proven, hey, I will put you in the cheap seats, even if you're my own teammate. I know some people had a problem with that. I do understand, but what he's doing is he's just essentially establishing, this is how I'm going to race. And if you want to, as the old saying goes, Johnny, you're going to serve it, be served. And so when people are checking up, that's because they know how Deegan will race. I don't think he's dirty. Rubbing is racing. It's not like he sawed off the front wheel. I'm sure everybody's got some example somewhere, but like you said, with Cole Davies, one of the things, and you were kind enough to come out to the Western camp that we did, I always believe that athletes need to be taught, if you know somebody's coming on your inside, our tendency is to shy away from them. If they're coming up on my left side, the tendency is to shy away from them instead of leaning into them. So if they come up and you're already leaning in, you have a better chance of knocking them down than them pushing you up. That requires balance and strength and everything else. But you didn't see Cole Davies do that. He kind of, like you said, checked up a little bit, and the momentum just put him over the berm. But Deegan's done a great job. And Johnny, to your point, everybody in the 450 class is taking notice of how Deegan races. Now, like I apologize, I missed who it was that said in the chat room here that the 450 class is no joke. And boy, is that true. Remember when I mentioned this even last week when AC said
it can be switched in one weekend.
Yes.
If Deegan comes out, like his first race on a 450 is going to be so crucial. It is going to either make it easier for him or make it harder for him. If he gets pushed around, it's going to be 5-6 races before he regroups and is able to get back to that almost winning form. But if he comes out there and starts just blowing through guys, and if some guys push on him, which they will, if he pushes back harder, he's going to end it right there. It's almost like bully at the playground, right?
Yeah.
If you stand up to them, they're going to not come back the next day, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that's exactly what Deegan is going to do.
But think about what you're saying. You're talking about the bully on the playground. So let's say that Deegan serves it up to Jett. You think Jett's going to not come back and do it again and again and again? This is where the playground dynamics have changed a little bit. If he smashes Tomac, you think Tomac's going to go, oh, Tomac's the bully, and Deegan smashes
Well, I
him?
would
You think
say a
Tomac?
message to the other guys, right? Like,
Yeah.
fighting for the win, I think, is a different demographic than it is within fighting for 6th, 8th place. I think the 450 class is going to try to like haze him a little bit. Like, hey, you want to come with the big boys? This is what the big boys do. And so there's always going to be a little bit of that pressure at the
100%.
front. So maybe a little bit more context.
And Art has a good question here. Do we think Deegan's faster than Tomac on a 450? I wouldn't even say that Tomac is all that fast on the 450. Just like, and I know that's going to come across out of context. It's not like he ran through Jett in that second moto. Now he was coming forward, yes. But the point is, and you said earlier that Deegan's not the fastest, but he wins races. And that's what's so interesting. Like the question is going from the 250 to 450s, racing men instead of boys, 100%. Because at this point, the championships at the 250 level, the experience, what it takes to win it, there's so much discussion. What does it take to win a championship? It's a lot, right? And when you start looking at how do you manage a long season to wrap up a championship, and then Johnny, I forgot, you had the number at the beginning of the season. What'd you say? There was 14 or 15 250 champions that are now in the 450 class. It was some big number. And you're racing against that type of experience where, now, Johnny, come full circle to what you said at the beginning of today's pod together, right? Deegan's lifting weights. He's getting ready for that type of a throwdown in the 450 class. Bigger bike, much torquier, much more experienced group of riders. Obviously older, which is always interesting to me that Jett's doing as well as he is. His racecraft is way beyond his pay grade. The way that he's learned his racecraft is just next level. It's an integration of Sexton and Webb and Tomac and, just some of the best of the best. And as Dazzy the dad says, they've learned a lot through Hunter, and Jett's the byproduct of everything they did wrong with Hunter. I think we're seeing that.
So to answer the question that the chat room is doing, because they anyway, not that we need to, but I'm going to just because.
Okay.
I think Deegan is faster than Tomac on a 450. I think that's what's going to be. However, Tomac, with his level of experience and the reason why he has won so many championships in motocross has been his longevity. And just if you're talking about beast mode versus the young dog, because we know Deegan is a fighter, I
Yeah.
still would give it to Tomac in the long run. In the short run, dash for cash, Deegan. But when you put 40 other riders on there and you put 11 motocrosses with, what is that, 22 motos,
Mhm.
I would give it to Tomac, because overall the experience is going to lean towards the more mature rider.
Well, the part that blows my mind, and we kind of talked briefly about this last week, is go back 5 years and you've got Deegan on what? A super mini at Loretta's? Look at how much progress in 5 years. I said to Michaela when we were watching, Casey Cochran got the whole shot, right? The year that I was working with Logan Best, the super mini class was Daxton Bennett won, Hayden Deegan was second, Casey Cochran was third, and Logan Best was fourth. Look at this past weekend. Now, Daxton Bennett parting ways with Yamaha, that's its own situation and its own challenges. But Casey Cochran getting the whole shot, leading, what did he lead? 4 laps. 5 years ago, these guys were in the super mini class. Hayden Deegan, 5 years ago in the super mini class. And now he's got 3-4 championships. It's astounding how far these guys have come in such a short period of time. And I have to give mad props to Casey Cochran. I mean, he got out front and he didn't like have a mental meltdown. I don't think his bike was as fast as the other guys, but Casey raced extremely well. And then Johnny, you brought up Vial a little bit earlier. That's another guy, right? Championship's gone. With pulling off on that first moto of the second race of the season, his championship is done. I think what happened at Hangtown this weekend is as crazy as it is to say, second round of the season, and we've already seen pretty much what the second half of the year is going to look like. Because it doesn't matter. Vial can come out and win every moto. He's 25 points down from everybody because he didn't even start. I don't even know why, and I haven't seen or heard from anybody. I've texted a few people, but nobody's heard. Why did Vial even pull off? I mean, they showed him working on his bike, but it didn't look like the subframe was demolished. It didn't look like the forks were bent sideways.
It had to have been the heat, Coach. I think it had to have been the heat.
But this is what I think is, and I say this tongue in cheek. This is what I find so funny, right? It's like going to the amateur national championships and then acting surprised that you have a 20-minute moto, acting surprised that it's going to be hot and humid. Do you seriously go to that race, a week-long race? Do you race all week long and then act surprised that it's hot and humid? Show me one year that it hasn't been above 90, or show me one year it hasn't been below 90 degrees. So yes, it's my wheelhouse. This is what I do for a living. But when you don't prepare for the demands of what is being put in front of you, either you're not a smart person or the person that's managing your training program is not preparing you correctly. And I can't emphasize this enough. When we look at the idea of taking an individual, and I'll change the subject, but yet it'll be in the same thread of thought. Anybody who was a pro, take somebody who's a 2 or third year pro, and you find out that Supercross and Motocross is going to merge and the series is literally going to run from January to October, you are screwed 3 ways sideways. Because physiologically, there is no way that you could pivot during the months of October, November, and December to be ready to race for 10 months at an elite level. Johnny, as I said earlier, you getting into the endurance world. Can you imagine Sam Laidlow has to perform at that level for 10 months? Imagine, choose your favorite triathlete, right?
Well, it's Coach. It would be the same thing that we see in moto right now. You'd start off with the first round with.
But my point is the young athletes that I have now, if this relationship stays together, which is still going to hinge off of the World Supercross, if they go away, I don't see this relationship staying where it's at. What's interesting is my athletes, Chase DeShiel, if I can get Soren from Australia to come over, these are some of our blueprints that we're working on right now. We're building them for a 10-month race series season. If you're a current pro and you're asked to now extend your fitness for 10 consecutive months, you can't make that adjustment. You're turning a yacht, and there's no way. That's why I think you're seeing such a high level of attrition.
Example, even with the amount of cheating and doping he did, if he raced all year long, I don't think he would show up for the Tour de France and still be able to win.
He said that. He said that. He didn't care about the Giros. He doesn't care about anything except the first week. And in the first week, as you come in healthy and then you build fitness as you go. And that's the part that's so interesting. When somebody tells me that they weren't ready for 100-degree heat, how? Like, you're racing summer motocross. Now, yeah, it was in California. It was a little odd that it was 100 degrees.
Well, coach, I think it's another reason why Sexton is not racing moto is these
Mm-hmm.
guys are using this as like a, oh, thank God, like I
Yep.
can take a break now because I am just done. I've been done for a while. Hence why I think 33 races is ridiculous. At most, there should be 20 for the
Yep.
entire year, at most.
But
But
the
I know it's
promoters,
a money thing. NBC
yeah.
required that they needed to add the races because the viewer count for the races ended up to be some number, so that's where the influx of the $9 million came from. But long term, I think you would get more viewers over time by having less races, because I've said this before, is it's
Mm-hmm.
much more fun to watch a race when you have Roxon, Sexton, Webb, Jett, you have all the guys right there consistently. That's more
Mm-hmm.
fun of a race to watch. And not to mention when, you know, every weekend there's a race. Like
Yeah.
sometimes you might just want to, as a consumer, you might just want to go ride your bike, or you might want to go camping or whatever. So there's a lot of times I think the sport is missing viewers because they just get tired of having every weekend be a race.
Well, the problem that you run into is our sport, with the exception of Davy Coombs, our sport is run by people who don't race or hasn't raced motocross, hasn't raced supercross. Davy Coombs, yes, he's raced, but when you're looking at the people that organize the Tour de France, they're looking at this going, okay, how do we get the best show? We don't run 11 Tour de France. By the way, for those who don't follow cycling, Tour de France is 3 weeks in duration. So all I was saying is you don't run 9 Tour de France's during the year, because the people that put the race series together would say, look, our show is going to get completely, it's going to be a shit show, right? The athletes are going to get more and more fatigued. They're going to get completely blown apart. The attrition rate's going to be high. But the problem is because the racers have no voice, the racers do what they're told. And when you make a comment that NBC required that it be X amount of races, that's giving no care or consideration to the riders and what they must endure. And when I say riders, remember, you've got a rider that includes a mechanic, that includes a truck driver, whether,
Dude, yeah, talking to those guys, they're all worn out at
yeah.
stuff. And at
And
the end of
how
the
much
race,
longer are they going to be able to keep this up? You're going to
yeah,
see some of the best mechanics and some of the best truck drivers and the most loyal people in the industry. They're going to be like, F it. They don't care about us. What am I doing to myself?
coach, I'm gonna have to go get this
Yep,
girl here.
absolutely.
But last thing, kind of winding up, when I was at Denver,
Yeah.
the riders, the mechanics, everybody looked like they're like, oh, okay, we're almost to a week off,
Mm-hmm.
like just
Yeah.
1 week off. And then
Yep.
the fans, dude, like I don't see how Colorado wants to have another Supercross, because that stadium was half full. There
Mm-hmm.
was hardly anybody there, right? It's just because everyone is discouraged with how many races there were. Opening ceremonies was McElrath, Savachi, badass dudes, okay? Badass dudes. But however, they're not the superstars of the sport
That's right.
that are paving the way to grow it, right? And
That's
so
right.
I know it's beating a dead horse, but if we look at like F1 and MotoGP, it is every 2 weeks. Yes, they travel around the world, but there is rest time for
Well,
there.
think
But
think about how close GNCC is to MX Sports. MX Sports owns the GNCC series. We race every other weekend. So you race on Sunday, you rest till Wednesday, you train Wednesday to Wednesday, and you do a 3-day taper and you race on the weekend. And the attrition rate of the pro class is very, very minimal. Sure, there's some people that have some, they're banged up and they're bruised here and there, but why would you not? And I say this very, very respectfully. I don't understand. You own a series that has a very small attrition rate of your pro class. The pro class is what sells the TV packages, and that's what gets the big corporate sponsors. And you go and, think about this game that MX Sports plays. They go and they sell these impression numbers, and then on the same token, you're watching your field get decimated. As you just said, we have Roxon's out. We now have Sexton that's out, right? And you start looking at, by the time we get to round number 4 or 5, if 8 or 10 of our top guys are out, which is not unrealistic. Look at Supercross. I mean, Pro Circuit started with a 6-man team and had 2 guys in the series at the end of the season. Like, if that doesn't show you how quickly the attrition is, my point being in all of that is the situation's going to grab the promoters by the throat, to your point, Johnny, when all of a sudden they're going to start losing money after they rent the venue, put the dirt in, and pay all the crews and start losing money. Then people are going to go, oh, maybe we should do something differently. And as you know, when the tail of the snake is following the head, why would you wait until it falls apart to fix it instead of making some
Coach, it's the
adjustments
same
early?
reason why states don't put a light in an intersection
Good point.
until there's a major accident, right?
True. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
innovation or competition breeds innovation. So until there's
Absolutely.
major competition, which it might not be this World Supercross thing, but it's the same thing with the whole Starks. Do I think that they're going to stay around? I don't. But do I think that they were the catalyst to create the innovation for Honda and everyone else to start using electric technology? Yes, I do.
Sure.
I got to go. This little
Yep.
person, she is screaming for
Absolutely.
ever. But hey, guys, Coach has got his podcast. He releases 2 episodes every month. Make sure you go check out his podcast. It is on all platforms, and as well, you can find it on YouTube by just searching Coach Rob Beams. And make sure you stay tuned for more than likely tomorrow when I have the breakdown of this weekend, and I'll go over a lot of stuff that we talked here. But appreciate everybody that has been in the chat. If you can do me a big favor, right, is hit that like button. And if you want to share it to somebody, go ahead and share it. I will try to upload this to the major platforms as well. But till next time, keep it WFO.